Okay, so you've probably seen these headlines today, March 24th, 2025, and
Yeah.
we're diving straight into some pretty big news about that genetic testing company, 23andMe.
Yeah.
So we're using this Fox Business report to kind of guide our deep dive today, and
Okay.
really the goal here is to help all of you understand what this actually means, especially if you know you've used their services or maybe you're thinking about using, these types of services in the future.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not just about, reporting the news, but really breaking it down so that you can actually grasp, what are the core things going on here and how might this affect your personal data and your choices moving forward.
So right off the bat, the big news is 23andMe has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection.
Yeah.
So Chapter 11, basically it allows the company to keep running while it figures out a plan to, either pay off its debts or maybe find a buyer.
Right.
And 23andMe has said that their main goal here is to, make it easier to sell the company, which is valued at around $50 million right now.
And it's important to remember that 23andMe, they've been a major player in this at-home genetic testing world since way back in 2006.
Yeah.
I mean, think about those ancestry kits, right? You send off your saliva sample. And they've really been the big name.
Right.
And they've been very clear about wanting to keep everything running smoothly during this whole bankruptcy and sale process.
Yeah. And I think, what comes to mind for a lot of people, and it certainly came to mind for me, is okay, what happens to all that personal data?
Yeah.
They've got millions of people who share their genetic info with 23andMe.
Right.
And so when news like this breaks, it's understandable that people get concerned, what does this mean for the security of my data? What's going to happen to it?
Absolutely. And that's a huge point. And it hasn't been ignored either.
Yeah.
I mean, 23andMe has put out a statement saying basically, look, there are no changes to how we store, how we manage, or how we protect your customer data.
Okay.
So they're really trying to reassure everyone that nothing's changing on their end in terms of those data handling procedures. Okay. But it's not just, the company giving their perspective.
Right.
The California Attorney General, Rob Bonta, has actually issued what he's calling a consumer alert.
Yeah.
And that makes everyone kind of sit up and pay attention.
Right.
What are the main concerns that he's highlighting for consumers like us?
Well, what's really interesting here is that the Attorney General is really focusing on the sheer scale of the information 23andMe has and how incredibly sensitive it is.
Yeah.
I mean, he specifically uses the phrase trove of sensitive consumer data.
Wow.
And even more importantly, he's reminding Californians about the rights they already have regarding their data.
Okay, so what exactly are those rights? Because this is vital info for our listeners in California, and honestly, for anyone who's concerned about, the privacy of their genetic information.
He's basically highlighting your right to tell 23andMe to do some very specific things.
Okay.
First, you can actually tell them to completely delete your genetic data.
Wow.
Second, you can demand that they actually physically destroy your original test samples.
And then finally, you can actually withdraw any consent that you previously gave for them to use your genetic data for research.
Gotcha.
So those are pretty big rights to keep in mind, especially now.
Right. So it's not just this bankruptcy happening in a vacuum.
Exactly.
There's a whole other layer of, concern and scrutiny around just the huge amount of personal information that's involved here.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about why this bankruptcy is happening.
Okay.
The report mentions multiple failed takeover bids.
Right.
And this is according to Reuters, so it sounds like, the company's been trying to find other options for a while now.
Yeah, and if you think about the bigger picture, the fact that multiple takeovers didn't work out probably means that 23andMe has some pretty big challenges going on behind the scenes. Potential buyers would have been thinking about all sorts of things like the company's value, the overall market for genetic testing, and maybe even worries about potential lawsuits, especially with that recent data breach.
Right. And we also saw some pretty big news with their leadership.
Yeah.
Right? So Ann Wojcicki, the co-founder and longtime CEO, has actually resigned.
Oh, wow.
But the way she talked about it on X, formerly Twitter, was interesting. She said she stepped down so I can be in the best position to pursue the company as an independent bidder.
That is interesting.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting move.
It definitely makes you wonder about who might end up owning 23andMe in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, her wanting to make a bid herself suggests that she really believes in the company's potential, or maybe she wants to have more control over its direction, especially when it comes to how customer data is handled and used for research.
Right. So for the time being, the CFO, Joe Savage, he's been appointed as the interim CEO.
Okay.
So things are definitely changing in terms of leadership as this wholesale process moves forward.
Right.
Now let's talk about the money part of it,
Yeah.
right? They've got to keep the lights on somehow.
Yeah.
How are they going to keep operating while all this is happening?
So the report mentions this debtor in possession financing commitment, or DIP for short, and it's about $35 million.
Okay.
Basically, you can think of it as a special loan, just for companies that are in Chapter 11.
Okay.
It gives them the money they need to keep doing the day-to-day stuff, like paying employees and keeping their services running while they're trying to sell the company.
Right.
And the article is very clear that 23andMe expects to keep operating during this time, which hopefully reassures their customers that the services they're used to probably aren't going anywhere.
Yeah, it is interesting, though, that the report doesn't mention any other specific companies that are interested in buying or making offers at this point.
Yeah.
Seems like Wojcicki's potential bid is the main focus right now.
Right.
And the financial figures that they give are pretty broad, right? Both
Yeah.
assets and liabilities are listed somewhere between $100 million and $500 million.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big range.
That's pretty common, actually, in the early stages of bankruptcy, It's often because it's tough to figure out exactly how much a company is worth and how much debt they really have.
Right, right.
So as things move forward and more financial details come out, we'll probably see that range get smaller.
Okay, now this next part I think is really important and kind of goes back to those data security concerns we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
So the report talks about this recent legal settlement. 23andMe had to pay $30 million and agree to 3 years of extra security monitoring to settle a lawsuit.
Wow.
And the main accusation was pretty serious. They said 23andMe didn't do enough to protect the privacy of like 6.9 million customers whose info was exposed in a data breach back in 2023.
Right.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, this settlement is a really big deal, and it really shows what can happen when companies that handle such sensitive info like genetic data have security problems.
Yeah.
The fact that 23andMe had to pay so much and agreed all this extra security stuff just shows how serious that 2023 data breach was. And it probably played a role in their financial problems, too.
Right.
It's a stark reminder for all of us about the risks of giving our personal info to these types of surveillance.
Absolutely. We also have a statement from Mark Jensen. He's the chair of the special committee of the board of directors.
Okay.
And he's thanking the employees for all their hard work and stressing how committed the company is to protecting customer data and being transparent about how they manage that data.
Right.
Especially during any potential sale. So it seems like they're trying to reassure everyone involved.
Yeah, that statement is definitely meant to calm both their employees and their customers.
Right.
And saying that data privacy is an important consideration in any potential transaction, well, that suggests it'll be a key factor for anyone who wants to buy the company.
Yeah.
But as always, the devil's in the details, right?
Yeah.
We need to see what the actual sale agreement says and what the acquiring company's track record is on data security, because that's what really matters.
Absolutely. The article also mentions some other recent difficulties that 23andMe's been facing.
Okay.
Like they had to cut 40% of their workforce last November. That's over 200 employees.
Wow.
So it's clear that the company's been dealing with some pretty big challenges lately.
Yeah, cutting that many employees really shows how much financial pressure they've been under.
Yeah.
They're probably trying to cut costs and streamline things, maybe because they knew a sale or restructuring was coming. It's another sign that things weren't good internally even before this bankruptcy filing.
And just to give you an idea of how the market is reacting to all this, the stock ticker for 23andMe is ME23.
Okay.
And the report says its value has dropped significantly down, over 50% to just 88 cents.
Yeah.
That's a big drop in a short amount of time.
Yeah, that big drop in the stock price shows how worried the market is about the company's financial situation and what might happen after this bankruptcy announcement and all these challenges we've been talking about.
Right.
It's a clear sign that things are really uncertain for 23andMe right now.
So to sum it all up, 23andMe has filed for bankruptcy to try and sell the company. They're saying they're still committed to data security, but that big data breach and settlement definitely raised some valid concerns.
Absolutely.
And now they're trying to sell the company, and Ann Wojcicki might even bid for it herself.
Yeah, and this whole situation really has bigger implications for the entire genetic testing industry. I mean, it shows how important it is for all of us to really understand the data privacy practices of any company that we give our personal info to.
Right, and this whole thing leaves us with a really important question to think about.
Yeah. What's that?
Given how sensitive our genetic info is and those very real risks that came out of that data breach, what are the most important things we should be looking for and considering when we're deciding whether to use these direct-to-consumer genetic testing companies in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about as this whole landscape keeps changing. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks everyone.